Nevada Territory, August 1873, the mine groaned like a dying beast just before the mountain tried to swallow her whole. Nora Newell had never run so fast in her life. Her skirts tore as she scrambled over fallen beams and broken rock, coughing through the thick dust choking the narrow shaft. She had come for one last check on her father's ledger books, tucked in the old office at the back of the Newell gold claim. But the ground had trembled while she was inside, and now everything behind her was falling. A beam cracked, overhead splinters rained. She stumbled, bracing herself, when suddenly a strong arm grabbed her waist and yanked her backward just as the ceiling came down. They hit the floor hard. "Do not move," the man said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel and smoke. He was on top of her, shielding her as rock and timber crashed just inches away. Dust settled in slow sheets, and the mine went still again, except for their breathing. When he finally rolled off her, she saw him clearly. He had a bloodied gash above his right brow, his hat gone, and dirt streaked across his jaw. But his eyes clear, steady blue held hers like he already knew her. "You all right?" he asked, pushing himself upright with a wince. "I think so," she breathed. Your head, I have had worse." He stood, offered her his hand. She took it. The name came to her then. She had seen him once or twice in town, buying feed or hauling lumber. "Wesley Langston," she said. He nodded. "Ma'am, you saved me." "Lucky timing," he said. "Saw you go in, figured no one should be alone in a mine this old. Guess I was right." Outside, the sun beat down on the broken earth, and the entrance to the mine was now half collapsed. Smoke and dust still curled from the rocks. "You are hurt," Nora said. "You need stitches?" Wesley touched his brow and winced. "Seems that way. My place is just down the hill. Come on." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Lead the way." Her cabin was small but neat, tucked near a dry creek bed with cottonwoods along the fence line. Inside, she moved quickly, ripping old linen, heating water, grinding dried yarrow with mortar and pestle. Wesley sat at her table, watching her like he was trying to figure something out. "You live alone?" he asked. "My father passed last winter, pneumonia." "I am sorry," she shrugged. "He ran the mine his whole life. I was just down there to collect his old records. I never thought you should not go back," he said firmly. "I was not planning to." She stepped closer with the cloth and herbs. "This is going to sting." "I will manage." She dabbed his wound gently, and he did not flinch, not even once. "You are not from around here," she said. "No, came down from Montana 2 months back, looking for work, looking for quiet." She met his eyes. "Did you find it?" "Until today," he said, and something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. When the wound was cleaned and stitched, she handed him a cup of water. "You should rest. I cannot take your bed." "Then take the chair." "I will be outside." She stepped out, heart pounding harder than it should have. He had saved her life. That part was simple. But the way he had looked at her, the way he had said her name like he had known it, before she spoke it stirred something deep and strange inside her. She sat on the porch. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching long across the yard, and she did not feel alone. That night she made stew with beans and potatoes. He cleaned up and helped her chop wood without being asked. He was quiet, but she did not mind it. His presence was solid, dependable. Like a fence post sunk deep in hard ground, after supper he stood to leave. "I will be back tomorrow," he said. "You do not need to." He looked at her, steady and serious. "You live alone. That mine is unstable. I will board it up, make sure it is safe." "It is not right, you doing it alone," she swallowed. "All right." He stepped onto the porch. The air had cooled, night settling in. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his head. "Good night, Nora." He walked off into the dark. The next morning he returned with tools. They worked side by side, boarding up the mine's entrance. He did most of the heavy lifting, hammering planks, reinforcing old beams. She brought water, held ladders, kept pace best she could. They did not talk much, but they did not need to. By midday, the mine was sealed. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know." He looked at her, and something passed between them. Not words, not yet. "I have a spare stall in the barn," she said. "If you want work, there is always something needs fixing." He nodded slowly. "If you are offering, I am." Days passed. He stayed. He fixed the fence, the roof, the shed door that had always stuck. She baked bread again for the first time in months. They fell into a quiet rhythm, eating together, working together, sometimes sitting by the fire without saying a word. She found herself waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch each morning. He never missed a day. One evening, a storm rolled in. Wind shook the shutters and rain pounded the roof. The fire burned low. She stood at the hearth, arms crossed. He sat a few feet away, drying his coat. "You ever have anyone?" he asked suddenly. She turned. "A husband?" He nodded. "No, you." He shook his head. "Never stayed anywhere long enough." She stepped closer. "Why now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because this place does not feel empty." Nora's breath caught. "It does not." His hand reached for hers, calloused, warm. She did not pull away. Outside, the storm howled. But inside, it was quiet and safe. Wesley laid the last cedar plank across the chicken coop roof as twilight pressed down over the valley. The hammer hung loose in his fist, his shirt clinging damp to his back. A coyote called from the ridge, thin and distant. He stepped down the ladder and wiped his palms on his trousers. Nora stood near the fence, her braid trailing over her shoulder, eyes on the hills where the last of the sun bled out behind the rocks. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked as he walked up beside her. She didn't turn her head. "Sometimes, but this land's got my father's sweat in it. I was born in that cabin, it knows me." Wesley nodded once. "Makes sense." I left places before they could know me." She looked at him then, the dusk softening her features. "What made you stop here?" He didn't answer at first. The wind stirred the cottonwood leaves and the chickens shifted behind them. "Something in your eyes when I pulled you out of that shaft, not just fear, like you were still choosing to live." Nora looked away, throat tightening. "I didn't expect you to say that. I didn't expect to say it." They stood quiet a while longer before she turned back toward the house. "I'll make coffee," she said. "Stay if you want." He followed her inside. The oil lamp on the table threw gold across the walls. She lit the stove and measured beans from a tin, her movements slow and careful. He watched her like a man watching fire catch tinder, quiet, uncertain, but certain of the warmth once it took. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and set them down. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them. "You ever wish you'd had a different life?" she asked, not looking up. "Sometimes I don't think I earned the one I've got." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "You saved me, Wesley." "That wasn't nothing." "I wasn't talking about just that day." She tilted her head, searching. "Then what?" "My brother died when I was 17. I'd gone to town for flour, left him fishing at the creek. Snake got him. I came back too late." He didn't blink, didn't look away. "I never stopped running after that. Figured if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to remember what I wasn't there to stop." Nora reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "You didn't run when it counted." Wesley looked down at her fingers folded over his. "Neither did you." The next morning, she found him loading chopped kindling into the bin beside the porch before sunrise. She handed him a strip of bacon wrapped in cloth. "You always work before you eat?" she asked. "Always been easier to move than sit still." They walked together to the barn, a soft mist clinging low to the earth. He checked the hinges on the back gate while she fed the hens. The air smelled of damp hay and juniper. "You ever think about marrying?" she asked, her gaze on the rooster strutting near the trough. He didn't answer right away. "Then I did once." She waited. "She was going to marry someone else. I left before she could ask me to." Nora faced him. "That sounds like something you regret." "I regret not staying long enough to know if I was wanted." Wesley bent to pick up a fallen nail from the dirt. "I'm not her," Nora said. He straightened slowly. "I know." They walked back to the house together, neither hurrying. That evening, she brought out her father's old fiddle from under the bed. She didn't speak about it, just placed it in his lap. He turned it over in his hands, the varnish worn thin in places, the strings still tight enough to hold sound. "You play?" she asked. "Not since the war." She sat down near the hearth, legs tucked beneath her. "Could you?" He set the fiddle beneath his chin and drew the bow across it. The first note wavered, but the second held. Then came a slow tune, one her father used to hum while smoking his pipe on the porch. She closed her eyes and let it settle into her bones. When he finished, she whispered, "That belonged here." He placed the fiddle down gently beside her. "So do you." Wesley reached for her hand, not as a question, not as a promise, just a truth, and she didn't let go. The first snow came early that year, curling against the windowsills before the cottonwoods had finished shedding their last leaves. Nora stood at the stove, folding cornmeal into boiling water with a wooden spoon, the scent of salt pork drifting through the cabin. The hearth burned low, heat clinging to the walls in a slow, steady hush. Wesley came in carrying a sack of dried apples, his coat dusted white and his shoulders stiff from the cold. "Your orchard's holding strong," he said, setting the sack gently on the table. "Some of the branches cracked under the weight, but I braced them." She nodded, not looking up from the pot. "That back row always takes the worst of it. Wind comes down the ridge too fast." He unlaced his boots near the door and stepped inside, his fingers red from the wind. "There's a mule team stuck at the ridge trail, 2 men trying to bring in timber, but the wheels snapped." "Did they make it down?" "They're waiting on a blacksmith from Dayton. I gave them some of our jerky. They'll be all right." It was the way he said "our," soft, unthinking. Like the word had already settled into his bones, she stirred the pot once more. "You're good at looking after people." Wesley leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Only since I got something worth staying for." She didn't answer, but her hand slowed at the pot, then stilled. That night they ate in silence, not the uneasy kind, but the sort that wrapped around them like wool. Afterward, she brought down a box from the shelf above the hearth. Inside were bundled letters, faded sketches, a brass button polished smooth with age. "My mother died when I was 6, she said as she laid each piece out on the table. "I don't remember her voice, just that she used to keep things like they mattered more than they did." Wesley touched the corner of one yellow, drawing a horse grazing under a juniper. "Your father's," she shook her head. "Mine, he said I had a hand for it. I stopped after she passed." He glanced at her. "Why?" There wasn't room for it anymore. She picked up the brass button and closed her fist around it. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of something unspoken. Wesley reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, folded piece of leather. "I've carried this since Shiloh," he said. "It's nothing but a scrap from my brother's saddlebag. I don't even know why I kept it." Nora opened her hand and set the button down beside the leather. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. "You keep things when you're not ready to let go," she said. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind shifted, lifting snow from the shingles. Inside, the firelight caught the edge of her collarbone and the curve of his jaw. He stood slowly, walking to the shelf where she kept a tin of thread and sewing needles. He pulled a chair beside hers and sat, laying the saddlebag leather flat on the table. "Show me how you used to draw," she blinked. "It's been years." "That's all right." "I've got time." She drew a line in silence, then another. Her hand remembered more than she thought it would. He watched each stroke with quiet attention, the kind that made her feel like she hadn't disappeared after all. When she finished, he turned the scrap toward him. It was just a sketch of the barn roof, snow-laden and crooked, but he looked at it like it was something rare. "You ever think of selling these?" he asked. She gave a dry laugh. "Not much call for pictures out here." "There might be." "Folks remember places better when someone gives them shape." She tilted her head. "You think that's what I do?" "I think you bring things to life." The words sat there between them, real and solid. He stood and reached for her hand. "You sure?" she asked, voice low. "I've never been more." She rose with him. His hand found the small of her back and hers settled at his shoulder. There wasn't urgency between them, just something steady and long-awaited. The fire burned low, the snow deepened, and their shadows moved together as if they had always known how. Come morning, the world outside was white and still. She found him mending the back gate, his shoulders straight, his breath rising in clouds. She brought him coffee in a tin cup and leaned against the post beside him. "I've been thinking," she said. He looked over, brows raised. "I want to fix up the old shed, put in a bench, maybe a window, start drawing again." He took the cup from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "I'll help you build it." She smiled then, small and steady. "I know." He reached for her other hand and laced their fingers together. Whatever winter brought, they were already something more than the cold could touch. The sound of the saw rasping through pine drifted out across the yard, steady as breath. Wesley worked beneath the low winter sun, Sleeves rolled past his elbows, a line of sweat darkening the back of his collar despite the cold. The shed was half-framed now, nestled beside the barn where the wind didn't bite so hard. Nora knelt nearby, sorting nails into a wooden tin, her wool skirt dusted with sawdust and bark. "You ever build something from scratch before?" she asked without looking up. "I've put things back together," he said. "But no, nothing like this." She handed him a square of sandpaper. "Feels different, doesn't it, knowing it'll outlast your own hands?" He ran the paper along the edge of the board, testing the grain with his thumb. "Yeah, feels like planting something." They worked until the sun dipped behind the ridge, the sky turning the color of burnt sugar. Nora stood back and looked at the skeleton of the shed, her breath curling in front of her. "Roof'll go on tomorrow if the weather holds," she said. Wesley nodded, tucking the hammer beneath his arm. "I'll bring the shingles from the loft after breakfast." She turned toward the house but paused. "You sleep all right last night?" He looked over at her, something unreadable in his face. "I did," her voice lowered. "I didn't." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that the chill no longer reached her skin. "What woke you?" Dreamed of the shaft, of the dark. "I couldn't breathe." "You're not there anymore, I know." She met his gaze. "But sometimes I wake before I remember that." "I'll stay closer tonight," he said. "If that's what you want." She didn't hesitate. "I do." The fire was burning low when they came inside. She poured hot water into the basin while he washed the grit from his hands. The silence between them had grown easy, like a thread pulled taut but never strained. She hung his towel by the stove. "The man who owned the livery in town asked if you'd take a look at his west fence. Said it's bowing out near the river bend." Wesley dried his palms slowly. "You want me to take it?" "I think he trusts you." He nodded once. "Then I will." They sat down to eat, and she passed him a plate with boiled parsnips and roasted grouse. He ate with quiet purpose, only pausing when she leaned back in her chair and said, "I used to think I'd never be known by someone again." He looked up. "Not the way that matters," she added. "Not the way where someone sees the parts you don't show." He set his fork down and reached across the table, his hand warm over hers. "You are seen now." She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. That night he pulled the cot from the corner and laid it near the hearth instead of the barn. She brought out an extra quilt, tucked it beneath his knees without asking. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she murmured. "But I rest easier when I know you're here." He lay down, arms behind his head, watching the fire settle into embers. She turned down the lamp and slipped into her bed, the faint creak of the frame the only sound. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then, through the dark, she said, "You ever think about staying for good?" He didn't answer right away. "I do," he said finally. "More than I let on." She closed her eyes. Then let on. The wind shifted outside, brushing the side of the house like a hand trailing over old stone. Inside, the warmth held. In the morning, she found him already splitting kindling, the kettle boiling on the stove behind him. He handed her a mug without a word, and she stood beside him, the silence filled with something steady and growing. The shed would be finished by week's end. And when it was, she'd hang her drawings on its walls, and he'd help raise the shelf for her paints. There would always be fences to mend and snow to clear, but they would meet each day side by side with nothing they had to prove. Because the love between them, unspoken, hard-earned, and quiet, was already built, board by board, with no part left hollow. The last nail went into the window frame just as a red-tailed hawk cut across the sky, its wings sliding through the air without a sound. Nora stood inside the shed, palms dusted with chalky white from leveling the shelf, while Wesley braced the ladder beneath the eave. The smell of cut wood and melted snow lingered in the air, and the silence between them was easy, the kind that only came after long days spent building something worth keeping. She stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. "You ever think you'd put in this many hours on something with a roof but no bed?" Wesley climbed down, setting the hammer inside the tool crate. "Didn't think I'd care to. But I've come to like the sound of your pencil scratching paper more than most things." She leaned against the door frame, the soft light warming the edge of her cheek. "I thought about painting again. I don't have oils, but I could trade sketches in Dayton for a few tins. He nodded. You should. You'd think folks out here wouldn't care for pictures of trees and fences. They might not, but they might care for the woman who makes them. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You always say things like that without flinching. No. Just when I mean them. She turned away, hiding the way her mouth lifted. The wind picked up behind them, rattling the loose branch high in the cottonwood, and she walked back into the shed, brushing sawdust from the windowsill. You ever miss the road? She asked. Wesley took a moment before answering. Not since I stopped sleeping with my boots on. She looked over her shoulder. You really think this is enough for you? He stepped into the doorway, filling it with his quiet stillness. I used to think I'd need more, something larger. But that was before I knew what it felt like to be needed. Nora's gaze didn't waver. I don't need you to fix things. I know, he stepped closer. But I want to. She let that settle between them, the warmth of it rising like steam off a kettle. Then she reached for his hand, calloused fingers brushing his. You're not going anywhere, she said. No, you're sure, I'm sure. That night she took the fiddle from its shelf and handed it to him without a word. He tuned it slowly, the strings creaking back to life. When he began to play, she didn't sit across the room as before. She sat beside him, her shoulder pressed to his, her sketchbook open on her lap. The fire cast long shadows on the walls, and the music filled the quiet with something steady and hopeful. She drew the shape of his hands as they moved over the strings, the curve of his temple, the line of his jaw when he listened for the sound only he could hear. When the bow stilled, she set the sketch aside and turned to him. I've been thinking, she said. Dangerous, he murmured. She nudged him with her elbow. I don't want to keep two beds in this house anymore. His eyes met hers. You wouldn't be asking out of kindness. No, her voice was steady. I'm asking because I don't want to wake without you here. Because I want to see you at the stove and in the field and next to me when the wind is loud and I'm tired of being brave. He didn't speak, just leaned forward and kissed her slow, certain nothing rushed, like every quiet evening had been leading here, like nothing needed to be explained. In the days that followed, the shed took on the scent of turpentine and graphite. She traded sketches in Dayton and came back with canvas and crimson paint wrapped in brown paper. He built a frame for her drawings near the window, where the light came in cleanest. They married beneath the cottonwoods in late April, just as the last frost melted from the fence posts. It was a small thing, just the preacher from Silver Springs, a handful of neighbors, and the wind threading through the dry grass. She wore her mother's brooch at her collar, and he tied a strip of his brother's saddlebag leather into his vest pocket. Afterward, they stood by the fire with coffee in hand, and no need for words. Years passed. The shed filled with paintings, barns in the snow, the ridge trail in spring bloom, his hands holding a fence rail. Folks came from as far as Carson City to trade for her pictures, and she never once raised the price beyond what a man could afford. Wesley took to teaching boys in town how to set a post straight and how to read the grain of a board before the first cut. He built cradles for half the babies born that decade and never charged a penny. They grew older in the house. Her father built 2 worn chairs by the fire, 1 fiddle bow worn thin, a porch that never sagged because he kept it strong. And every morning, without fail, she woke before the sun and found him beside her, boots off, hands warm and home.